For 24 years, I wrote down every word spoken in that courtroom. Nobody notices the woman who writes things down until the day the words come back. At our divorce hearing, my husband never once said my name. 23 years of marriage, and in that courtroom I was the respondent. He stood at the petitioner's table in his best gray suit and told the court, in that voice juries used to love, that he was entitled to half of everything, half the house, half the savings. And he argued it the way you argue about furniture. The respondent contributed clerically to the household. The respondent's earnings were incidental. Not Joyce. Not my wife. Not once. He erased me in the room where I had spent my whole career, and the young associates in the second row smiled into their legal pads. And his new associate watched me from the gallery the way you watch something you have already beaten. When my attorney rose and said the respondent had a few words of her own, Grant did not even look up from his notes. He checked his watch. He had told his lawyer this would be over in 20 minutes. What he did not know was that my attorney had a single stapled document in her folder. 11 pages. I knew exactly what was on those pages because I am the one who typed them word for word in that very room back when he still said my name. He was right about the 20 minutes, though, just not the way he meant it. If you have ever been told that your work did not matter, take a second and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Joyce, and I am a court reporter. For 24 years, I have been the quietest person in every room I sit in, 3 feet from the witness stand in the Cape Girardeau County Courthouse in Missouri. People think I type. What I actually do is keep time from swallowing the truth. Every threat muttered in a custody fight, every confession that fell apart on cross-examination, every promise a man made under oath with his hand in the air. It all passes through my fingers on a stenotype machine, and it becomes permanent. Lawyers perform, judges rule, I preserve. A courtroom without a record is just a room where people argued. I did not learn it from my mother or anybody's grandmother. I learned it at a technical college 2 towns over, because at 19 I saw a woman in a courthouse hallway carrying a little machine like a secret, and somebody whispered that she was the only person in the building nobody dared to interrupt. It took me 3 years to get my speed certification. 225 words a minute, 95% accuracy, and I tested higher than anyone in my class. My instructor said I had the one gift the machine cannot teach. I listen without flinching. People forget you are there. That is the whole job. You become furniture that remembers. I learned what the job really was in my 2nd year. In a burglary trial, nobody remembers but me. A detective on the stand changed his story between the morning and the afternoon. Smooth about it, confident, the way people are when they believe nobody kept the morning. The defense attorney stood up and said 4 words that I have heard maybe 1,000 times since. Could you read that back? And the whole courtroom turned, not to the judge, not to the witness, to me. I lifted the paper tape and I read the morning version out loud, flat and exact, the way we are trained to, no color, no opinion, just the words. The detective's face changed. The case changed. And I drove home that night, 23 years old and shaking, because I finally understood what the quiet woman in the corner actually holds. A courtroom can survive a lying witness. It cannot survive a lost record. When memory and paper disagree, the paper wins. Remember that. It matters later. I met Grant in that courthouse in the fall of 2002. He was a young attorney then, all shoulders and borrowed confidence, arguing his first real case and losing it badly. Afterward, he found me in the hallway and asked, half joking, if the record could be edited to make him sound smarter. I told him the record is the one thing in this building nobody can charm. He laughed like I'd given him a gift. He asked me to dinner the same week. For a while, it was good. I want to be honest about that, because the women who watch these stories deserve honesty. He was funny. He noticed things. When he passed the bar exam years before, his family had not even come to see it. And I think some part of him decided the courtroom would be his family instead. I understood that. The courthouse was mine too. We married in 2003 at the little stone church on Lorimier Street. He whispered during the vows, "You keep the record on this one, Joyce." I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. I should have listened to the words more carefully. Keeping the record was always going to be my job, both the keeping and the being alone with it. It started at the firm's Christmas party, maybe our 3rd year married. A senior partner asked what I did, and before I could answer, Grant put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Joyce? She just types what smarter people say." And the whole circle laughed, and he laughed, and I stood there with my drink and did the math on the mortgage payments the way I always did and said nothing. That sentence became his party trick. She just types what smarter people say. I heard it at barbecues, at bar association dinners, once at my own birthday, to my own cousin. Every time the laugh. Every time my silence, which he mistook for agreement, when really it was a habit of the hands. In my job, you do not react. In my job, you take it down. I confronted him about it exactly once, in the car after that first Christmas party, somewhere on the dark stretch of Route K between the club and our street. I said it quietly, the way you test ice. I said, "You know I passed the state certification that only 1 in 5 people pass, right?" And Grant did the thing he did in front of juries. He reached over, squeezed my knee, and said, warm as a heater, "Sweetheart, it was a joke. Everyone knows you're the backbone. That's why it's funny." And then he turned up the radio. That is how it works, ladies. Not a slap, a radio dial. I sat there the rest of the drive, doing what I do best, taking down every word in the courtroom of my head, and filing it under a date I would not look at again for 20 years. The savings account has its own scene, and I want you to see it, because he tried to take it later. Every second Friday for 19 years, on my lunch break, I walked the 3 blocks from the courthouse to the First Missouri branch on Broadway, and I deposited part of my county check into an account I had opened before the wedding. The teller, an older lady named Miss D, used to stamp my deposit slip and say, "Steady as rain, Mrs. Kellerman." Grant never once walked those 3 blocks. He called it my rainy day drawer, and once, at a dinner, my little hobby with the passbook. But when the firm had a bad quarter, it was the rainy day drawer that made the mortgage. When his Lexus lease came due in a lean year, the drawer. He found the account boring right up until the day he found it worth stealing. The money worked the same way. My paycheck was steady county money with a pension. His went up and down with his cases. So it was my check that paid the mortgage on the house on Themis Street, while his money went back into the firm, into the suits, into being seen at the club. He called my salary the little check that keeps the lights on. He said it fondly, the way you talk about a dog. And here is the part I want you to hear, because I know some of you are living it right now. He never yelled at me, not once in 23 years. Cruelty does not always come in a raised voice. Sometimes it comes in a calm one, at a dinner table in front of guests, dressed up as a joke about how one of you matters and one of you types. Then, 3 years ago, the firm hired Paige. Sharp suits, fresh law degree, a laugh she aimed like an instrument. Grant started working late on cases that never seemed to appear on any docket I typed, and started saying her name in stories where it did not need to be. The moment I knew was small, the way the true moments always are. A dinner at the Hartman's house last summer. Somebody asked Grant about an old case of his, a zoning fight from before Paige had even passed the bar. And before he could answer, Paige answered. Not the public version, the inside version. The version with the detail about the county commissioner's brother that Grant had told exactly one person on this earth, at 2 a.m. in our bed, 11 years ago. She told it with his pauses. She told it with his punchline. And the table laughed, and Grant laughed, and under the tablecloth my hands kept typing on my knees, which is a thing they do on their own when the words in a room start to matter. You have heard this part of the story before. Every woman has. I do not need to type it out for you. I did what I do. I listened without flinching, and I waited to see how much of my life he was planning to argue away. The answer came on a Saturday in April, at the club, at the firm's 25th anniversary dinner. I had spent that morning at the courthouse, working a double session, and I came straight from work, tired, in a plain navy dress. Paige wore red, and at the head table, in front of judges and partners and 2 county commissioners, my husband stood up with a glass in his hand, gave a toast about the people who build a firm, and thanked by name the partners, the associates, the brilliant Miss Paige, and finally, last, with a little wink to the room, my wife, the stenographer, who has faithfully recorded my dinner requests for 20 years. The room roared. She laughed the loudest, red dress, head back, teeth. I sat there with my water glass, and I felt something I had not felt in years of swallowing it. Not heartbreak, inventory. I looked at that man, and I began, very calmly, to take stock of everything in my life that had my name on it, because some animal part of me already knew what was coming. I got my proof 8 days after the club dinner, and I did not go looking for it. A reporter 2 counties over broke her wrist, and the agency asked if I could cover a deposition at a hotel conference center in St. Louis. I said yes because saying yes to work is the whole architecture of my life. The deposition ran long, and at 7 in the evening, dragging my machine case through the lobby, I looked into the hotel restaurant and saw my husband's gray suit at a corner table and the red dress across from him, and his hand on the stem of her wine glass like it was something he had signed for. They were not hiding. That was the detail that rearranged me. 2 hours from home was hiding enough in their arithmetic. I stood in that lobby, invisible in the exact way I have been invisible my entire career, and I watched the 2 of them for 1 full minute. Then I rolled my machine out the door, drove the 2 hours home, and said nothing. You do not interrupt testimony. You let the witness finish. It is better for the record. The divorce came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, over pot roast. Grant set down his fork, folded his hands like he was addressing a jury, and told me he wanted a divorce. He said the marriage had run its course. He said, and I am quoting him exactly, because quoting people exactly is the one thing I am world-class at. I'll be fair, Joyce, but let's be realistic. The house, the accounts, that's marital property. I built the life. You typed through it. He had already moved a suitcase to Paige's apartment. He filed first, that same week, so fast and so clean that I understood the paperwork had been drafted before the pot roast. He wanted half of the house my county paychecks had carried for 19 years. Half of the savings that existed, because I had spent 2 decades being boring with money while he was being brilliant with his. And when his lawyer's letter arrived, there was a line in it about the respondent's limited earning capacity as a clerical worker. A clerical worker. 24 years, 14,000 hearings. Every word of that county's justice, alive because my hands kept it alive. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table until the ice maker was the loudest thing in the house. I did not cry the way I expected to. I read the letter twice, folded it along his lawyer's crease, and then I did something I had not planned. I climbed the stairs to the sewing room, the little room at the end of the hall that Grant had not entered in a decade because nothing in it billed by the hour. On the shelf above the thread drawers sit 9 green ledger books, one for every stretch of my career because a court reporter of my generation keeps her own log of every job she has ever worked. Date, case number, courtroom, nothing else. 24 years of my invisible life, in block letters, in order. I was not looking for anything. I was looking for myself, I think. Proof that all those silent years had mass, that they existed somewhere outside his jokes. I ran my finger down the spines, pulled the book that held 2017, and sat on the floor of the sewing room like a girl, turning pages of my own handwriting. And somewhere around midnight, my finger stopped on a line and a door opened in my memory. Quiet, like a file drawer sliding. October, 9 years ago. Courtroom 2, a creditor lawsuit, and a lawyer with his hand in the air. I sat on that floor for a long time, listening to a voice from 9 years ago get louder in my head. And then, alone at midnight in the sewing room, I laughed, once, like a hiccup. Because I had just remembered exactly what my husband said in Courtroom 2, and I knew, better than any lawyer in this state, that it was still there. You have to understand what happened to Grant's firm 9 years ago, because he made very sure the town forgot. 2017 was his bad year. A malpractice claim, 2 big clients gone, and a business creditor, a litigation funding company, suing the firm and coming after the partners personally. If they had won everything, they could have reached into our lives, into the house, into the accounts. So Grant did what Grant does. He performed. He took the stand in Courtroom 2 as a witness in his own creditor case, raised his right hand, and swore under oath. And when their attorney asked him about the house on Themis Street and the savings at First Missouri, my husband looked that man dead in the eye and said, word for word, "Those assets belong solely to my wife. The house has been paid from her county salary since the day we bought it. The savings are hers, from her earnings. I have no claim to them, marital or otherwise, and I never have." He said it beautifully. He almost sounded proud of me. The creditors could not touch what was not his. The case settled, the firm survived, and the whole performance took 11 pages of transcript. I know it took 11 pages. Because the court reporter sitting 3 feet away, taking down every word of my husband's sworn testimony, letter perfect, was me. He never even glanced at my corner of the room that day. Why would he? Nobody notices the woman who writes things down. I was furniture that remembers. Here is what he forgot, and what most people never know. Witnesses go home, lawyers go home, but the record stays. Certified transcripts of that hearing sit in the county archive, public, stamped, retrievable by case number for a few dollars a page. And a court reporter with 21 years of habit keeps her own certified log of every job she has ever worked. Date, case number, courtroom. Mine lives in 9 green ledger books on a shelf in the sewing room he never once entered. I did not need to steal anything. I did not need to hack anything, or beg anyone, or hire an investigator. The weapon was already public. It had been sitting in the archive for 9 years, patient as only paper can be, filed under a number I could recite from memory. Still, I went and touched it first. The county archive lives in the courthouse basement, 2 floors under the room where I have spent my working life, and it smells like dust and toner and 1950. Peggy at the records window has known me for years. She did not even ask why. I filled out the request slip in careful block letters, paid the copy fee, $13.20 in exact change, and stood at the counter while the printer hummed out 11 pages. Then I read my husband's sworn testimony standing up in the basement, in the building where he said it. My own initials were on the certification line at the bottom, from 9 years before. 2 women had done their jobs honestly in that courtroom in 2017. One of them was about to matter very much. The next morning, I drove to the office of Ramona Fields, a family lawyer with a small practice and a reputation like a straight razor. I put the 11 pages on her desk with the case number, the date, and the courtroom written on a sticky note on top. Ramona read all 11 pages without saying a word, twice, the second time with a yellow highlighter. When she finished, she took off her glasses, looked at me for a long moment, and said the only thing that needed saying. "Mrs. Kellerman, do you know what a man cannot do after swearing under oath that something is not his?" "Ask for half of it," I said. She smiled like a door locking. "Ask for any of it." Which brings us back to that courtroom. But first, the hallway. 10 minutes before the hearing, Grant crossed the marble floor to where I sat with Ramona, buttoned his jacket, and offered me one last deal in the tone of a man doing charity. He said, "Joyce, sign the standard split now, and we skip the circus. You have never won an argument in that room. I have won hundreds." He even smiled at Ramona, lawyer to lawyer, like they were both in on the joke of me. Ramona looked up from her folder, pleasant as Sunday, and said, "We will see you in there, counselor." He walked away with the bounce of a man who had already drafted his victory toast. I watched him go and felt something almost like pity. Almost. He had spent 23 years married to the person who keeps the words, and he still believed the only words that counted were the ones said out loud by him that day. Then the doors opened, and my husband told the judge that I type for a living and he argues for a living, and everybody knew how this ends. Judge Whitcomb had been on that bench for a long time. I had sat through 9 years of his docket. He knew my work the way you know a bridge you drive over every day. You never think about it, and you trust it completely. There was one strangeness to sit with first. For the only time in my life, I was in a courtroom and the stenotype machine was not mine. The county had brought in a reporter from the next circuit, a serious young woman I had trained at a conference years back, because you cannot keep the record of your own case. She gave me a small nod when I sat down. So I watched my divorce the way the public watches everything, helpless, hopeful, and depending completely on the quiet person in the corner to keep it true. 24 years on the other side of that arrangement, and I finally understood, in my body, why the record has to be sacred. Because on the worst day of your life, it is all you have. Ramona stood up, unhurried, and said she would like to enter one exhibit. Certified transcript, in re the creditor matter of 2017, testimony of the petitioner. She handed one copy to the clerk and one copy to Grant's lawyer, and I watched my husband's face while his attorney read. I have spent my whole life watching faces while people read documents. It is a thing court reporters get to see from the best seat in the house. I have seen guilty men read verdicts. I have never, in 21 years, seen color leave a face the way it left my husband's. Ramona read it into the record slowly. She did not perform. She did not need to. Those assets belong solely to my wife, line by line. The house has been paid from her county salary since the day we bought it. His words, in his voice, you could almost hear it. I have no claim to them, and I never have. Then she looked up and said, "Your Honor, my client is happy to agree with the petitioner. We simply ask the court to hold him to his own sworn testimony. The silence in a courtroom has textures, I know them all. There is the silence before a verdict and the silence after a sentence. This one was new to me. The silence of 40 people trying not to look at one man. Judge Whitcomb read the pages himself, took his time. Then he looked over his glasses at the attorney who had spent 2 decades in front of him and asked one question very quietly. "Counselor, were you lying then, or are you lying now?" There was no third option, and every lawyer in the room knew it. Grant's attorney requested a recess. The settlement conference took 40 minutes in a small room with bad coffee. I have waited outside 100 rooms like it. This time I was inside, and I mostly watched my husband's hands. Grant has beautiful courtroom hands, expressive, persuasive, hands that have sold 12 juries a story before lunch. That afternoon they just signed. Page after page, initial here, initial there, the fountain pen with his monogram scratching away everything he had marched in to take. At one point, he looked up at me and started to say something, an opening statement forming out of habit, and Ramona said, without lifting her eyes from the documents, "Counselor, the testimony is closed." He signed the rest in silence. The house was mine. The savings were mine. They had been mine since 2017, sworn, certified, and stamped, and the man who forgot that fact was the man who said it under oath. Grant did not laugh on the way out. He walked past my table, and for the first time in 23 years, he looked at the stenotype machine, really looked at it, like it was a witness he should have deposed. And at the double doors, the old bailiff, the one who had smiled at Grant's joke an hour earlier, and then caught my eye and stopped, stepped forward and held the door. Not for the attorney of record. For me. He said quietly, so only I could hear it. 24 years, Mrs. Kellerman. Some of us always knew who kept this place honest. I have been thanked exactly 4 times in my career. I remember each one the way other women remember jewelry. The little check that kept the lights on kept the house too. It has been a while now. Let me tell you where everything landed, because I know that is why you stayed. The divorce closed with the estate exactly where his own testimony left it. Nobody appeals their own sworn words. His firm survived, smaller, and Paige stayed. That is the part nobody predicts. They are still together, the 2 of them, in the smaller office with the smaller cases, and every partner's dinner in this town now happens without them. She bet on a man with an empire, and she gets to keep the man. Some sentences do not need a judge. Me? The county promoted me a few months after the settlement. Official court reporter for the circuit, the senior chair, the one that trains the new reporters. There is a young woman named Robin on my machine some mornings, 23 years old, fast hands, and I teach her the only lesson in this job that matters. I tell her, type it exactly, not what they meant, not what sounds better, exactly. Because someday, somebody in this room is going to depend on the truth being boring and precise, and you will be the only one who saved it. The first time a lawyer asked Robin for a readback, she froze for half a second and looked at me, and I nodded. And she lifted the tape and read the words out flat and clean. And I watched a whole courtroom turn toward a 23-year-old the way they turned toward me in a burglary trial a lifetime ago. Afterward, she asked me if it gets less terrifying. I told her the truth. It never stops being heavy. It just stops being yours. The words belong to the people who said them. We only carry them back. 2 Fridays after the settlement, on my lunch break, I walk the 3 blocks from the courthouse to the First Missouri branch on Broadway, the walk I have made every second Friday for 19 years, and I deposited my paycheck into my account, in my house's name, in my life's name. Miss D is mostly retired now, but she was at the counter that day, covering for somebody, the way retired women always are. She stamped my slip, slid it back, and looked at me over her glasses for a second longer than usual. Small towns hear everything. The courthouse leaks like a paper cup. Then she said what she has said to me for 19 years, except this time it landed like a benediction. Steady as rain, Mrs. Kellerman. Steady as rain. Some empires are built loud. Mine was built on a lunch break, 3 blocks at a time. The house on Themis Street is still mine, and so is the sewing room. Last month I bought a new ledger for the shelf, the 10th, same green cover, same ruled pages. The first entry is not a case number. It is a date and 1 line in block letters, resumed keeping my own record. A woman should write down her own life with the same care she gives to everyone else's. It took me 24 years to learn that, and 1 October morning to prove it. And yes, Grant still practices in Cape Girardeau. Small counties only have so many courtrooms. Some weeks he argues in mine. He is polite now, careful, the way men are careful around a person they finally understand. He states his appearance for the record, and I type his name, and my hands do not tremble, and they never did. Last month, during a recess, a young defense attorney asked me, joking, if the record could be edited to make him sound smarter. 24 years ago, that joke started my whole life. I looked at him, and I gave him the same answer because it was always the true answer, long before I knew how true. The record is the one thing in this building nobody can charm. He laughed. Court came back in. I put my hands on the keys, and the room went quiet the way it always does, waiting for the woman who writes things down. For 24 years, I wrote down every word spoken in that courtroom, and nobody noticed the woman who writes things down. My husband forgot that words spoken in a courtroom never die. I would know. I am the one who keeps them. If my story touched you, leave a comment and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.